My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber,
I'm Taimur, I'm a data scientist and writer,
and you're listening to Not Overthinking,
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition.
Hello and welcome back to Not Overthinking. Taimur, how are you doing today?
How am I doing today? I think I'm doing pretty well actually. This week was an interesting week for the company. We just moved into our own apartment in London. So now we have a place where Lucas can live and I'll sort of live there 50-50, and we'll kind of work there, and yeah, happy days.
That's actually pretty cool. I'm quite excited for you.
Yeah.
Have you added me to the guest list or something?
No, I think we want to do up the place and we'll probably have like a housewarming. And yeah, I think it's nice because like any time any sort of friends or family are kind of in central London, need a place to crash, there we are.
Okay, but you haven't added me to the guest list.
I'll add you to I will tell the concierge to let you in.
Oh, perfect. So it's not like a key that I have to...
Not really, no. It's like, no.
Exciting.
How has your week been?
It's been good, man. I've been on call pretty much all day, every day. So I leave the house at 6:30 in the morning and I get home at like 10:30 at night, and then I go to sleep and then I repeat the process. And that was for like 4 days in a row. Whoa. But then I had a whole day off on Friday to make up for this. And on Friday, I went into Cambridge Town Centre. I did some coffee shop hopping. I marked some essays. I did a supervision. I went to the Adam Brooks pantomime, which was excellent. So I had a pretty packed day on Friday after these long ass kind of 15-hour long days of being on call.
Nice.
So before we get started with this episode, Taimur, what do you want to do in 2020?
In 2020, what do I want to do? I think top of my list is probably joining an online learning community that offers membership with meaning, with much to explore. I am referring, of course, to Skillshare, our sponsor for this episode. Skillshare, like I said, is an online learning community with classes, courses. What are we calling them?
We're calling them classes.
Classes.
Thousands of classes.
Thousands of classes on
a huge range of disciplines.
Basically anything you can think of.
Basically anything you can think of. They've got illustration, graphic design, photography, UI design, that's user interface design, creative writing, animation, fine art, music and video production, film and video marketing, productivity, web development, all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, I think the thing I think is really cool about Skillshare is the sort of community aspect. And I've said this on the podcast a bunch of times. Like in the past, when I was sort of trying to learn new things, like learning to code or learning photography, the thing that actually let me do it was the fact that I had this one particular online forum, where I could just ask questions and sort of hang out with other people who are also trying to learn this thing, and that makes a massive difference. And that's like one of the best things about Skillshare is like if you're doing this course, you also have this community of people. Sorry, if you're doing this class. You also have this community of people who you can hang out with and kind of learn from.
Yeah, that's very true. And I've got my own class on Skillshare about how to edit videos. It's called From Beginner to YouTuber, which I thought had a bit of a ring to it. But every day I get an email saying these are the discussions that are happening in your class's community page. And it's people asking questions and other people replying to those questions. And occasionally I go in and reply to questions as well. So it's actually genuinely quite a nice kind of community feeling.
I think you should stop paying Not Overthinking for plugging your Skillshare course every single episode.
A class, Taimur, not a course. But yeah, my Skillshare class is one of the sponsors of this podcast. There's another really good one that I like by my internet friend Thomas Frank, which is all about how to develop a productivity system. And he's actually got a new one for 2020, which is actually really good. It's about how to essentially habit forming and how to create good habits that stick over time. So I've been starting watching some of the videos on that, and I think, damn, this is some pretty good stuff.
So what should people do if they want to take a class on Skillshare?
Well, people can join Skillshare by going on skillshare.com/not-overthinking. That's skillshare.com/not-overthinking. And with that, you'll get a 2-month free trial, and then the annual premium subscription is less than $10 a month. So for the price of like a lunch or like your Netflix subscription, you're getting thousands of classes and all sorts of things to help you learn, be a better person, learn more skills in 2020. Isn't that fun?
It is indeed. What are we talking about this week?
So this week we're going to be doing a book discussion, and you'll be very excited to know that we're talking about The Courage to be Disliked, which is one of the very few books that you've ever read. I think that's right.
That's true, yeah.
One of maybe 5 books that you've read.
Yes, it's in the top 5.
In the top 5. So the final 2 Harry Potter books are on this list. The Courage to be Disliked is on this list. Is there any other book that you've...
I've read the whole Twilight series. That's what, like 3 books, 4 books?
It's 4 books.
So maybe I've read like 7.
Okay, fantastic. Where does Courage to be Disliked rank amongst the hierarchy of Twilight, the final 2 Harry Potter books, and that?
I think it is actually like I don't read that many non-fiction books as books. I read lots of articles and things. It is one of the few kind of non-fiction books that I have read and was kind of glued to. I'd probably like the only one, and that had like a ton of novel ideas and concepts that I was like, whoa, okay, let's hear this, that kind of thing. Whereas usually with like a non-fiction book, it's like, it's just like reframing stuff that you'll already have seen in some different form. Whereas this was actually like quite novel and sort of daring stuff.
So the title of the book is The Courage to be Disliked, subtitle, How to Free Yourself, Change Your Life, and Achieve Real Happiness, which sounds like an absolute formula for a self-help book. And I think it's a testament to the quality of the book, the fact that you've read it and rave about it, even though your whole brand is based around being a self-help hater.
Right, I don't think I agree with that. But let's,
Anyway, can you give us a summary of what the book's actually about? And then we'll kind of dig into our kind of main points and highlights and personal reflections from it.
Sure. So I might be forgetting a few details here, but essentially the book is like an accessible overview of a lot of concepts, the sort of psychology concepts from this guy called Alfred Adler, who was a psychologist in the sort of early to mid 1900s, I think.
19th century, so 1800s.
Oh, sorry, 1800s. Okay. And I think these two people, I've forgotten the names. What are the names of the authors? Whatever.
The names of the authors of this book are Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga.
Yeah, so Ichiro and Fumitake, I think, basically kind of wanted to make Adlerian psychology sort of more accessible, and they kind of compiled this book. And it's a very interesting format. It's not like a traditional fiction, but the format is like a conversation between a student and a philosopher. And so, like, just to set the scene, basically, there's this sort of young, brash student who like goes to this philosopher's house, guns blazing, saying like, "All right, old man, you think you're so enlightened. Let's hear what you have to say," kind of thing. And then the philosopher will say, something like, "Oh, yes, yes, young one," that kind of thing. And then he'll say like something, and the student will be like, "What? No way! Like, you're an out of touch old man. This stuff doesn't work in real life," kind of thing. And so it's this sort of dialogue. I think it's meant to be modeled after the sort of Socratic dialogue that I don't know. Socrates kind of taught that way, I think. I don't know. Something about Socrates.
Yeah, that's very good. So essentially, it's written as a dialogue, sort of like a script. So, for example, if I were to read you the introduction, it says, "Youth, I want to ask you once again, you do believe that the world is in all ways a simple place? Philosopher, yes, this world is astonishingly simple and life itself is too. Youth, so is this your idealistic argument or is it a workable theory? What I mean is, are you saying that any issues you or I face are simple too? Philosopher, yes, of course. Youth, all right then, but first let me explain why I've come to visit you today. Firstly, I want to debate this with you until I'm satisfied, and then, if possible, I want to get you to retract this theory. Philosopher, haha. And then youth talks about this, and philosopher talks about that. So it's a sort of two-way conversation, sort of youth saying something and then philosopher saying something, and that's the format of the whole book. And I guess while reading it, the reader is supposed to think of themselves in the place of the youth, kind of asking this old, wise, enlightened philosopher these difficult questions and really trying to dismantle his arguments. But as we see over the course of the book, the philosopher has some really, really good points to make. So do you want to kick us off, Tamor, with what kind of some of the key points in the book are?
Yeah.
And we're only going to touch on like a handful because this is a long book. It's a really good read, so you should definitely read it. And in fact, we'll put an affiliate link in the podcast show notes. So if you buy it from that link, we'll make like, I don't know, I think 3 pennies per purchase or something
Really?
Stupid like that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's incredible. So if enough people buy it, we might be able to buy a cup of coffee.
That's amazing. Yeah, please do buy. I'll be curious as to how this whole Amazon affiliate book stuff works. Okay, so I think the first concepts that the book presents is the idea that there's actually no such thing as trauma, and this is obviously quite a controversial, in-your-face idea. What does he say about this, Ollie?
So essentially, the first chapter is called "Trauma Does Not Exist," and the argument basically goes as follows: like the philosopher says that in Adlerian philosophy, there is no such thing as trauma, i.e., cause and effect relationships about past life events really don't exist. So a simple example is you might say, let's say you've got a cold with a fever, and you might think the cause of that cold is the fact that you went outside and you weren't wearing anything, therefore you caught a cold. Okay. What he's saying is that this does not apply to that. This sort of model basically doesn't exist. So for example, there is no such thing as trauma of past experiences. there is no such thing as it's not quite as clear a cause and effect. So in Adler's words, he says, no experience is in itself a cause of our success or failure. We do not suffer from the shock of our experience, the so-called trauma, but instead we make out of them whatever suits our purposes. We are not determined by our experiences, but the meaning we give them is self-determining. And then the youth says, so we make of them whatever suits our purposes. Then the philosopher says, exactly. Focus on the point Adler is making here when he refers to the self being, being determined not by our experiences, but by the meaning that we give them. Your life is not something someone gives you, but something you choose yourself, and you're the one who decides how you live.
Can you think of any examples of like day-to-day stuff where our normal way of thinking would be different to the sort of Adler's approach? So like, let's say...
Okay, so here we go. Here's the example that they're using. So the youth is giving an example of his friend who was abused by his parents when he was younger, and therefore he stays locked up in his room and feels socially anxious and therefore can't go outside to talk to anyone.
Okay.
So kind of reading on from this chapter, the youth says, okay, so you're saying that my friend has shut himself in his room because he actually chooses to live this way? This is serious. Believe me, it's not what he wants. If anything, it's something he was forced to choose because of circumstances. He had no choice other than to become who he is now. Then the philosopher says, no. Even supposing that your friend actually thinks, I can't fit into society because I was abused by my parents, it's still because it's his goal to think that way. Youth, what sort of goal is that? Philosopher, the immediate thing would probably be the goal of not going out. He is creating anxiety and fear as his reasons to stay inside. So essentially what the philosopher is saying is that this friend who is being locked up in this house and says that it's because my parents abused me, that's why I'm too scared to go outside. He's saying that that's not what's going on. What's going on is the friend is scared to go outside and he's using his parents as a kind of post hoc justification to that fact.
Right.
And I think this is particularly this is an interesting argument to lead with in this book, because especially in the kind of special snowflake culture that we seem to live in, according to certain people on Twitter, it seems like we're all very keen to explain away things as being due to some past trauma.
Yeah.
And therefore it's a very...
It's a very hot take. It's a very controversial framing of this.
Yeah.
Because like all of sort of the way that the entire sort of modern sort of discussion around mental health is framed is sort of, it's framed in a way that kind of takes agency away from the individual. And so it's kind of like, if you are having some problems, it's because of, certain things that happen to you that may have been out of your control, or, one thing a lot of people kind of immediately jump to is that like, these problems are chemical imbalances in the brain and things like that. And so the framing is very much of like the person doesn't have agency. Whereas Adler's framing is completely the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like the person has complete agency. I don't know where like, I'm not a scientist or anything. I don't know where the science really stands on this. I feel like this whole discussion is, the whole sort of topic is really about framing and how you look at it. I'm sure certain frames are more useful in certain contexts than others. I mean, you've kind of, as a medic, is there any like consensus on things?
So there is some extent of kind of actual chemical imbalance in the brain, as shown by the fact that antidepressants kind of change this chemical imbalance, and that seems to sort of help some people.
Yep.
But kind of the whole basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is kind of goes back to what the Stoics used to do back in the ancient Greek days, which was this idea that, okay, I mean, yeah, fine, you've had this trauma in your past, but it's now your job to not allow that to dictate how you're going to live the rest of your life, and to kind of actively move past it and realize that you are in control and you can control your response to that trauma.
Yeah.
That's ultimately the basis for CBT, at least according to some articles that I read, kind of exploring the foundation to it. And that's sort of what Adler is saying as well. He's saying, for example, that when we are angry, it's not that something has angered us, it's that we are choosing to be angry, and it just so happens that thing is a decent justification for that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably, I think it's a very good hook at the start of the book, because like when you read it, it's like, whoa, okay, this is like the opposite of the stuff I usually hear in terms of how it sort of approaches this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone reading this for the first time will immediately bring to mind so many examples like, oh, what? So you're saying my friend who suffered sexual and child abuse and this, that, and the other, it's, are you saying he's really making up all these reasons to kind of stay locked up in the house? And that's not quite what it's saying, but it's a very sort of interesting, nuanced argument. And I think this is a good, as you said, it's a good hook. It's a good hot take to bring people in at the start.
Yeah. So I guess it sort of brings us on to the second concept of the book, which is that we don't have emotions. Our emotions don't happen as a result of things. We instead actually have emotions in order to serve our own goals. And so, like you said a second ago, like if I'm feeling angry, it's because if I'm angry at someone, it's because I wanted to feel angry at them, and I found some reasonable justification, like maybe they left the toilet seat up or something. I don't know. And I wanted to feel angry, and so I sort of internally used that incident, the toilet seat thing, to kind of create anger within myself because I wanted to be angry. I think this one was, I really liked this because, again, it's kind of like the discussion here is not really about like science. Like, I don't think that, I'm relatively a layperson in this field, but I don't think this is not something that science has figured out. Like, this is why this is why people feel this way, blah, blah, blah. I think all of the sort of development in this kind of stuff is different ways of approaching, how we feel and how we think about stuff, different framings. And once again, the framing of like, we have emotions to serve our goals rather than the other way around is just really controversial and the opposite of like the framing that we hear generally.
So it's really interesting that we're talking about this week because this week I listened to a podcast as part of Invisibilia. I don't know if you come across that.
Yeah, I know Invisibilia. Yeah.
It's like done by NPR, sort of exploring the invisible facts of everyday life or something along those lines. But there was a really, really good episode of it entitled Emotions. And it was like this absolutely riveting kind of like roller coaster of a ride about exploring the topic of emotions and how emotions are created. And it kind of ends with an interview from this like famous psychologist who's been studying emotions for like 25 years and has sort of looked at all of the evidence available for it. And what she says is that basically there are only four true, as in the only innate internal experiences our body has are pleasant and unpleasant, and arousal and calmness. Arousal meaning kind of paying attention to stuff, and versus calmness or peace or like calmness. Yeah. Those are the only four emotions that internal emotions that we're born with. Like, our body has this internal sensing mechanism that can sense when stuff is wrong, but it can only categorize it into those four things.
Is this true? Like, is this agreed upon by science?
Yeah. So she's like written a book that summarizes the research on emotions and stuff. So I would imagine
this isn't a like
this is not a hot take
framework or anything. This is actually
this is not a hot take. This is supposedly the summary of the last 25 years of research on emotions.
Great.
But she then has gone on to research why we experience emotions like anger and sadness, and this whole podcast episode is framed in the context of how sad should you feel if your child dies in a car crash. Okay. And it kind of explores the point of view of the mum of that child and also the lorry driver who crashed into the car to kill the child.
Yeah.
And about how he experiences the grief completely differently to how the mum experiences it. And the point they make is that all of these emotions that we suffer, that traditional thinking had that, these are evolutionary based, like, for example, fear, when, if back in caveman days you saw a tiger or a lion or something, you would feel that feeling of fear and the adrenaline would get to you, and that's fear. And we would say that, okay, so fear has an evolutionary basis. She says that that's kind of the wrong way of looking at it. It's more that we have these four internal experiences, and based on our kind of societal learning, we recognize certain things as being anger-inducing or fear-inducing or sadness-inducing. And she's done research on societies that don't have specific words for specific emotions. Ooh. And in those societies, people don't feel that emotion because they haven't got the concept of it.
Love it.
So if you were in a tribe where the concept of anger did not exist, you would not feel angry about anything at all, even if someone were to punch you in the face. It just would not be something that you would experience.
Yeah.
And so it ends with, like, and everyone should listen to this. We'll link that in the show notes as well. Sadly, not an affiliate link. Everyone should listen to this. But it ends with this idea that this is it's a very liberating thought, that all of the emotions, all of the negative things, even all the positive things that we feel in our life are basically a result of societal conditioning and the story that we are telling ourselves in order to manufacture that emotion of anger or loyalty or sadness or whatever. And so if we want to change that, we actually can. It's not evolutionary hardwired to us. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point that Adlerian psychology makes about things like anger and things like any emotion. Yeah. The example that they give in this book is the youth saying that, the other day I was reading a book in a coffee shop where a waiter passed by and spilled some coffee on my jacket. I yelled at him at the top of my lungs. I'm not normally the sort of person who speaks loudly in public places, but I flew into a rage and forgot what I was doing, and what the youth is saying, that the cause is the waiter spilling coffee on his new jacket, and the effect is him getting angry. And the philosopher is saying so you're saying that this was an unavoidable occurrence and you couldn't do anything about it. And then the youth says, yes, because it happened so suddenly. The words just came out of my mouth before I had time to think. The philosopher says, then just suppose you happened to have a knife on you yesterday, and when you blew up, you just got carried away and stabbed him. Would you still be able to justify that by saying it was an unavoidable occurrence and I couldn't do anything about it? Then the youth says, come here. He says, come on, that's an extreme argument. The philosopher says, it's not an extreme argument at all. If we proceed with your reasoning, any offense committed in anger can be blamed on anger and will no longer be the responsibility of the person, because essentially you are saying that people cannot control their emotions. And then the youth says, how do you explain my anger then? And the philosopher says, that's easy. You did not fly into a rage and then start shouting. It is solely that you got angry so that you could shout. In other words, in order to fulfill the goal of shouting, you created the emotion of anger. The goal of shouting came before anything else. That is to say, by shouting, you wanted to make the waiter submit to you and listen to what you had to say. As a means to do that, you fabricated the emotion of anger. And I think that's really interesting. I think this also applies to being upset about things.
Yeah.
Like when we're upset about things, it's not the thing itself that's made us upset. It's the story we're telling ourselves about the thing, and we're essentially manufacturing the tears and the tantrum and whatever in order to make a wider point.
Yeah.
Like, our goal is being upset. Our goal is not reacting to the thing.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, this is just like, it's just like the polar opposite of everything. I don't know, just like what we consider to be like the normal way of thinking about things, which is things happen and we have emotional reactions to them.
Yeah, cause and effect.
Yeah.
But there is no such thing as cause and effect. There is no such thing as trauma. Emotions are manufactured because we choose to experience those emotions.
It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, so I think the next concept is kind of related. It's the idea that unhappiness is something that we choose for ourselves. Do you have any Kindle highlights on this one, Ali?
I think in this, what the philosopher and what Adler is saying is that when we're unhappy, it's because we want our circumstances to be different to what they actually are. And we are using our circumstances as a justification that, my circumstances are bad, therefore I'm unhappy. But the way that Adler says, and the way the philosopher says in this book, is that at some stage in your life, you chose being unhappy. It's not because you were born into unhappy circumstances or ended up in an unhappy situation. It's that you judged the state of being unhappy to be good for you. And by good, he means beneficial. Like, the story that you're telling yourself that you're unhappy, it's benefiting you in some way, which is why you are continuing to choose that particular framing of it. And I think sort of just riffing on this point, like this is often like one of the things that the whole self-help stuff says about negative emotions like unhappiness and sadness and sort of fear and whatever is think about how someone else in that exact situation might feel. And if you can bring to mind an example of anyone you know who, given the same circumstances, would react in a different way, that means it's really not the circumstances themselves that are making you unhappy. It's that you're choosing to be unhappy and you're using the circumstances to kind of justify that.
Yeah, yeah. On the topic of choosing to be unhappy, I found a good quote. I highlighted it on my Kindle yesterday.
Not from the book or from elsewhere?
No, a different book. How do I see my Kindle highlights?
Go on the Kindle app.
Kindle.
Then use the hamburger menu. So you've got to actually open the book.
Oh, dude.
Icon next to the font.
Oh yeah, here it is. It's the phrase. Yeah, actually, so this is a different book I was reading, also related to this kind of stuff, and it's in reference to sort of the idea of trauma and the past kind of affecting our sort of outlook on things. And the quote is completely out of context, but I think it's very nice. Very colorful quote. Though it may be putting it harshly, it could be said that one is getting drunk on the cheap wine of tragedy and trying to forget the bitterness of an unfortunate now. And I think, drinking the cheap wine of tragedy is a really nice way of putting, because the thing is, I don't know, look, I can only speak for myself, but certainly I think when I'm feeling like, negative emotions in general, whether that's like sadness or whatever, it is on the whole negative, but there is something
nice about it.
Again, nice is the wrong word. It's like a negative thing, but you kind of get off on it in a weird way.
It's sort of like the enjoyment in backbiting about other people and hearing the drama.
Yeah.
It's a negative thing, but you're sort of getting off on it.
Yeah, and I think that's what this. I think the idea of drinking the cheap wine of tragedy is a nice phrase. I think that kind of points to this concept.
Yeah. So I was always intrigued when my friends would say that they've got like different playlists for when they're feeling sad. And initially I thought, oh, so, you've got a playlist that makes you feel happy. And they were like, well, no, I've got a playlist that makes me even sadder. And as if this was a totally normal thing.
Yeah.
And so sort of on questioning them further, they all kind of admitted that, sometimes it's nice when you're sad to continue to wallow in that sadness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm totally on board with that. There's definitely like a sort of catharsis to kind of, just like dialing it up. All right, the next, and this might be my favorite concept from this book, is the idea that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. So there's the idea that like any problem that you think you have in your life, it comes from the fact that you have relationships with other people. And so it always like, if no one else in the world existed, you actually wouldn't have any problems if you had like some food and some water and some shelter. And yeah, I think I really like this because certainly internally, whenever I feel like I have a problem, I always kind of do this sort of, I try and dig into it. I always ask, okay, like, why is this a problem? And I keep asking why. And inevitably, if you think you have a problem and you keep asking why this is a problem, what you will get to is something around like, some interpersonal relationship. I'm worried what so-and-so will think of me. I'm worried how my friends will. Yeah, everything will eventually come down to it being a relationships issue.
And Adler apparently takes this a step further and says that specifically the interpersonal relationship issue that all problems are a result of is invading the invasion of tasks. And this is a great concept in this book that actually kind of changed the way I think when I first read it, which is the idea that we each have our own tasks. Like it is our task to do the thing, for example, to, I don't know, take our exam, whatever. But it's someone else's task. It's someone else's task to kind of grade that performance or to be approving or disapproving of that task. So, for example, in having arguments with our parents, that is always a result of either someone intruding on someone else's tasks or someone having their own tasks intruded upon. And the example that he talks about is when a parent gets annoyed at a child for not doing their homework. Doing the homework is the child's task. And if the parent gets annoyed at it, then they are, and tries to forcibly make the child do the homework, they are invading on the child's task. And therefore, that's going to cause an interpersonal relationship problem, which is therefore going to be a problem overall. Whereas if the parents were to accept, okay, I can lead the horse to water, but I can't force it to drink. I can create the conditions. I can have a nice clean table for my kid to sit at and say, here's your work. If the parent can do their task of creating that condition, but it's ultimately the child's task to do the thing.
Yeah.
And the child's going to get annoyed if the parent is infringing on that. Parent's going to be annoyed in trying to infringe on the child's task.
Yeah. And
so every single problem in our lives is a result of infringing on someone else's tasks or having our own tasks infringed upon.
Yeah. I love this as well. It's just, and it's, look, the geniuses of this book and this like sort of this guy's sort of, psych theorist, it's just so daring. Like very rarely, I feel like nowadays, very rarely do you hear anyone try and peddle a stance that is like completely lacking nuance or like, conditions or like everything we hear normally is like, oh, you might believe XYZ under these following conditions. And of course there are these exceptions and, all this kind of stuff. Like, it's so rare to hear someone actually take a strong opinionated stance, like wholly.
Yeah, that every single problem is a result of task infringement.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Wait a minute, that can't be right. I've definitely got problems that aren't a result of task infringement. Hold on. Can't really think of any.
It's so cool, man. Look, my life goal is to come up with a completely like unnuanced theory. Obviously, like the bar is very high if you want to have this like completely this theory or this proposition that lacks sort of any conditions or nuance. I think it's a hard thing to do. I'm pretty convinced by the ones that this book comes up with. So yeah, I mean, every problem is an interpersonal relationship problem. If you are listening to this and you think oh mate, this would be sick. if you think you have a problem that is not an interpersonal relationship problem, tweet us at @Overthinking, or you can like DM us to keep it confidential or whatever. I'd be very interested to hear this. In the next podcast, we'll like read these out if anyone can actually think of any.
Okay, wait. So I'm curious if someone were to message us and say, my problem is that I can't afford an iPad Pro and I want an iPad Pro.
Okay.
how is that an interpersonal relationship problem?
Okay, I guess this is kind of hard because then it requires a sort of asking of why until you get to the relationship thing. So, okay, yeah, hypothetically, you say, I want an iPad Pro. I was like, why do you want an iPad Pro?
Oh, because it'll make me more productive in school.
Why do you want to be more productive in school?
Because then I'll pass my exams.
Why do you want to pass your exam? And so on. Eventually, it'll get to because I want my parents to improve on me. I want like society to think you know how it is. Don't you think?
I feel like there has to be some nuance with this idea.
Okay, I think the nuance is this. The nuance is if you're truly in a position where your basic human needs, I'm talking like really basic human needs of food and water and shelter. If they're not being satisfied, then fine. If you're literally starving to death,
and while listening to this podcast,
why listening to this podcast? It's a good way to go, by the way. I will accept that you are not in an interpersonal relationship problem in that moment, but yeah, I think everything else basically is. And I'd love to be shown otherwise. So yeah, do write in. So we just talked about how every problem is a interpersonal relationship problem, and that every interpersonal relationship problem comes from either someone else intruding on a task that is ours, or from us intruding on someone else's task. The next concept, which I mentioned, I think in the last episode, 2 episodes before this.
Oh, actually, I've got a few highlights that I've actually highlighted on this.
Oh, okay.
When I first read it. So the chapter is called How to Rid Yourself of Interpersonal Relationship Problems. And it says that all you can do with regard to your own life is to choose the best path that you believe in. On the other hand, what kind of judgment do other people pass on that choice? That is the task of other people, and it's not a matter you can do anything about. And then the youth says stuff like, oh, but wait, so you're saying it's not my job to please my parents? And the philosopher is saying is correct. It is not your job to please your parents. It's your job to do what you think is best. And whether or not your parents are pleased or displeased by that is entirely their job.
That's their task.
And so all you can do is live in the way that you think is, intentional or best or whatever you're doing without worrying about them approving of it or disapproving of it.
Yeah.
And then there's another one. Remember the words of the grandmother. You're the only one who's worried about how you look. Her remark drives right to the heart of the separation of tasks. What other people think when they see your face, that is the task of other people and is not something you have any control over. Anyway, yeah, that just, I think, ties up this point nicely. Well, what was the next one?
The next concept is this, and I talked about this in the last episode, the idea of viewing other people as your comrades and stopping. I think like nowadays, like implicitly, we all just have this framework of like comparison and competition between us and our fellow man. And this book has a chapter or two talking exactly about this, about how like we need to get out of this mindset of seeing other people as competition and comparing, basically comparing human beings, and get into the mindset of seeing other people as our comrades. And that once we get to the point of like, you look at a sort of complete stranger and you feel a sense of camaraderie with them, that sort of opens up essentially a whole new way of living.
Yeah, so there's a quote here from the philosophers that says, "It does not matter if one is trying to walk in front of others or walk behind them. It is as if we are moving through a flat space that has no vertical axis. We do not walk in order to compete with someone. It is in trying to progress past who one is now that there is value." And then the youth says, "Have you become free from all forms of competition?" The philosopher says, "Of course. I do not think about gaining status or honor, and I live my life as an outside philosopher without any connection whatsoever to worldly competition." Youth: "Does that mean you've dropped out of competition? That you somehow accepted defeat?" Philosopher: "No, I withdrew from places that are preoccupied with winning and losing. When one is trying to be oneself, competition will inevitably get in the way." I think this is really important. Like, this is one that occasionally comes up on my Readwise, that daily email that I get with 5 highlights.
Yeah.
And I always think, damn, this is something I need to work on, because like I don't actually care about competition within medicine, but when it comes to kind of the YouTubing thing, I very occasionally find myself drawn into kind of like sort of having this kind of internal competition, like finding other people who are a similar size to me and thinking, oh, he's growing at a higher rate or she's growing at a slower rate. Oh, this is great. I'm doing well. And I start to think of it as if it's a competition, but it's really, really not.
Yeah.
So anytime that thought comes, this book is one of the sort of part of the symphony of voices behind me trying to that sort of overrides this idea of competition.
Yeah.
And even within medicine, which is inherently competitive and where you're all kind of a lot of people are applying for the same job or same set of jobs, there is a competition for places and you get like a score and stuff like that. I still try my best to view it as a competition, like a game that I'm playing with myself, as opposed to a competition where other people are taking part.
Yeah.
And sort of on this note, I've been thinking of it's actually kind of unrelated. So somewhat related. I really like the framing of exams, like, school and university exams, as being a game, like a game that you play with yourself, like a single player game that doesn't have other people competing in it, because then you don't need to worry about how well did that person do, how well am I doing relative to them, and so on.
Yeah.
But there is still an aspect of friendly competition within doing exams that I think is fine and is actually healthy.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking of a way to kind of frame this in my mind.
How do you summarize that thought?
And so the thing I came up with was, it's sort of like doing a raid in World of Warcraft.
Oh my God.
So if you're not familiar with World of Warcraft, it's basically this game, right? And
everyone has turned off the podcast at this point.
That's fine. That means I can explain it. Basically, World of Warcraft is this online game, role-playing game, where you create like a warlock or something, and you level up the warlock. Tamar and I used to play World of Warcraft back in the day. I even clocked about 180 days of game time on it.
That's mental.
Which over a 4-year period was on average about 3.5 hours a day.
Nice.
Between year 8 and year 12, or between year 9 and year 13, or something like that.
Wow.
So this was my productivity guru back in the day. I was playing 3.5 hours a day of World of Warcraft for 4 years. That's a very, very long time. Anyway, in World of Warcraft, when you get to the kind of the final level, like level 80 or whatever it is, you then get the end game content. And in that, you form these raids. Perhaps, I think that's the thing in Pokemon Go as well. But in World of Warcraft, you form these raids where you get a group of 20 people together and you will work together to take down a particular monster. And within these raids, you're all working together. So you're taking down the monster and everyone progresses as a team.
Yeah.
But within that, there is a friendly competition amongst the damage dealers to see who can deal the most damage to the boss.
Yeah.
I got 8,000 DPS damage per second and this guy got 7,000. And you have this sort of friendly competition with one another while you're on the same team trying to take down the boss.
Yeah.
Just to see who's got the highest damage.
Yeah.
Equally, alongside the damage dealing roles, you have the tank role, whose job is to kind of take the hits so that he supports everyone else. And you also have the healer roles, whose job is to purely heal everyone else up.
Yeah.
And not do any damage to the boss, but they heal everyone else up and help the whole team get through.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good way of thinking about exams at university.
Yeah.
Because we've got me, my friend Jake, my friend Paul, whatever. We're all consider ourselves the damage dealers of the group, and therefore we will compete against one another in that friendly small way to see who can deal the most damage.
Yeah.
Who can get a slightly higher score. But equally, we've got friends who are more like support roles, and their aim is not to get the highest score at all. That's not what they're about. What they're about is, being nice and friendly and making sure everyone gets through the exams and sharing the notes and doing it in a really nice and open way. And as long as they pass the exam, that makes them completely happy.
Yeah.
I think it's totally fine. And that's I think a good framing of dealing with this idea of exams is being sort of competitive, but also not thinking about the competition.
Yeah, I think that's a nice framing, and just to keep with the World of Warcraft analogy.
Yes.
I think it also extends outside of your own raid group. So people sort of organize themselves into different guilds, basically little clubs that you can join with other people. And each guild will try and beat the boss, before the other guilds and stuff. And again, it's a very friendly competition thing where each guild wants to be the first guild on the server to kill the Lich King or whatever it was back in the day, right? And so everyone's trying to do that, and you're sort of competing with other guilds for that. But for example, if another guild did kill, if they got the, world first killing the Lich King achievement, your reaction wouldn't be damn, screw these guys. Your reaction would be oh, whoa, that's sick, And just within a raid, if your best thing was 8,000 DPS or something, and someone else managed to somehow get 12k DPS, your reaction would be you'd have lost the competition or whatever, but your reaction would be whoa, that's awesome,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's friendly competition, I'd say.
And then to continue that analogy even further, it's as soon as a guild has done the world first kill, and as soon as the second one has come about, they will release their video explaining the strategy and explaining the fight for everyone else to follow.
Yeah.
To follow from that point. It's not a case of we're going to hold this to ourselves.
Yeah.
Once that competition for spot 1 and 2 is gone, they're more than happy to share absolutely everything they know. You can look at their logs, which they make public, to see exactly what they did to get through this fight.
Yeah.
So that everyone gets through it together.
Yeah.
And I think that's a nice way of thinking about these sorts of exams as well. And that's why, obviously sharing resources amongst each other and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think that's a nice analogy for comradeship. And I said the same thing on the previous episode where we talked about this, which is we've all been in sort of scenarios or environments where we're sort of with a group of like close friends, which, you know, feels like a safe and a safe space and whatever, and you sort of feel very comfortable, and you're sort of vibing essentially. I think vibing sums it up. I've been told I overuse the word vibe on the podcast, but I think it's actually a very helpful term.
Who's told you that?
One of my friends who listens.
Wait, you've got friends who listen to the podcast?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. So like,
so I've also got a surprising number of friends who listen to the podcast. Like, they don't care about the videos at all, but they're like, "Oh, I actually listen to the podcast." I'm always like, "What? You actually listen to the podcast?" I'm always so surprised and flattered when anyone does.
It's nice. Always nice.
Anyway,
but yeah, we've all been scenarios where like you're with a group of people and you're just vibing, and it's like, you know, you feel the sense of camaraderie, right? And look, I said this on a previous episode. Imagine if you could always have that. Imagine if like you're on this like cramped tube with other people. And, you know, one like framing of that is like, oh, this sucks, I'm like really cramped or whatever. Imagine if your framing of all these situations would be like, yeah, man, I'm just vibing with humanity, you know, kind of thing.
Totally cool, man.
Yeah. That would be awesome. And so like, yeah, I'm not there, definitely. But that's what this book is trying to get you to a point of.
So since you actually mentioned this on the podcast last week, and because I've been on call in the evenings in the hospital, I'm often kind of like walking down a deserted corridor and someone turns the corridor and walks past me. And in my head, I've been thinking, I've been kind of doing a little nod and thinking, that's my comrade over there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I sort of, in my head, I think, hey, comrade. So, and therefore, that just puts a smile on my face and I kind of nod, be like, hey, morning, how's it? Evening, whatever. And just that switch of, you know, nod, comrade.
Yeah.
That's my comrade over there walking past.
Yeah.
It's just quite nice.
Yeah, I was thinking it today. Like we were coming from Covent Garden to King's Cross, and there's like a long tunnel. There's a lot of walking in King's Cross Station, right? Just a bunch of people walking this tunnel. There were like some youths who were like kind of running, sort of chasing each other, kind of yelling at each other, kind of thing. And I just sort of thought to myself, these are all my comrades, and we're all like comrades in this tunnel together. We're all like walking, and I felt better. It's great.
All right, so that was comrade. What's our next point from the book?
I think this sort of brings us to the final concept, which is that ultimately happiness is a feeling of contribution to something.
Oh yeah, this was actually revolutionary, because, you know, being a self-help kind of junkie, I found so many different definitions for happiness and meaning and stuff. But this was the first time where I've really come across it kind of stated in an explicit way. Because everyone kind of says, oh, well, happiness, you know, it's one of those things that you kind of chase and it's really hard to define. And anytime you try and define it, it kind of evades you. But this guy literally straight up says, happiness is the feeling of contribution. As though, like, if you feel like you are useful to someone else or something else, then you are happy. And the pursuit of that feeling of contribution is what the pursuit of happiness is. I just thought, damn, that's really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a nice concept. I think it's not as I think it's not as like profound as like the other some of the other positions that the philosophers taken in this, because like happiness is such a fuzzy concept that like, yeah, you can say happiness is a feeling of contribution, and if you sort of squint, you can kind of see why that might be true. So yeah, I've heard people say things like, you know, happiness is love, and yeah, if you squint your eyes, you can see why that might be true. So I don't think that's as profound as something like every problem is an interpersonal problem, or and that kind of thing. But I think it's nice. It's nice.
And then I suppose kind of the final, the reason the book is called The Courage to be Disliked is that ultimately the point that he's sort of getting to is that in order to be free, you need to have the courage to be disliked. He says, the courage to be happy also includes the courage to be disliked. When you have gained that courage, your interpersonal relationships will all at once change into things of lightness. And kind of the point that he's making is that it's fine to not want to be disliked, but inevitably we are all going to be disliked in some way or another. And it's the way that we respond to that dictates how free we are. Like, if you have the courage to be disliked, then you don't really care if people dislike you. You will do what you can. You'll do your task to kind of make sure you're not, you know, actively being a dick to someone. But beyond that, it is someone else's task. But beyond that, it's someone else's task to judge how they feel about you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the crux of all of the stuff that he's kind of talking about. And then they go on to talk more about how to kind of live in the moment, live earnestly in the here and now, and all this sort of stuff. But that is sort of why the book is called The Courage to be Disliked.
I don't think the title actually... the title sounds really clickbaity, and I think I didn't feel like most of the book actually was relevant. Like, if you read this title, and look, how the hell do you title a book like this? I get it. But yeah, the title isn't that relevant to it, but I guess it's, yeah, this is how it is relevant.
How do you feel about being disliked?
Me?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I think I'm a lot more okay with it now than before. And I think like over the past, I think like a lot of my sort of personal development over the past few years, one way of kind of tracking it is to kind of see how willing and happy you are to be disliked by other people. And I think I'm definitely getting better at it. I can't give you like a number. I'm a 4. I can't articulate it, but getting better. I think having the courage to be disliked is kind of also the idea of like, people say phrases like being secure in yourself, and I guess like insecurity is sort of not having the courage to be disliked and kind of needing validation from other people and that kind of stuff. I think it's a framing of something that lots of people say in lots of different ways. What about you? You 3?
Yeah, I think I'm a 3 in the courage to be disliked. No. So obviously I don't like being disliked, but I know that it's going to be inevitable. I don't think anyone likes being disliked. And I think the way that I think about it is that if someone dislikes me for some wrong that I have done to them, then I would like to correct that wrong if it was unintentional, because I don't like unintentionally causing harm to people.
Yeah.
If it was intentional and then I made the decision at the time and I thought it was the right decision, then but if people dislike me, which I'm sure plenty of people do, the idea of haters and stuff. On that note, there was a good Paul Graham article about this. I don't know if you read it.
Yeah, I've read it.
It's this idea of...
I'm a tech bro, dude. Of course I've read the Paul Graham essay.
Of course you've read it. It's an essay, not an article. Gosh. But what he says in this is that a hater is basically sort of like a fanboy, and like he defines fanboy as being someone who is uncritically admiring of your work and just thinks that everything you do is fantastic. Whereas a hater is sort of like that exact kind of mindset, except all of it is in the negative. And he says that by definition, a hater must consider you a fraud in some way. Like as soon as you achieve any level of fame or notoriety or anything at all, then the haters are going to develop, and the haters can't deny your fame, but the story they tell themselves is, oh, that person is a fraud. That's why he's so famous and no one else can see it. And that's kind of like their reason for disliking you. The point he makes is that, as soon as you have any level of success or fame, you're going to get haters and you have to become okay with dealing with it.
Yeah.
So for example, anytime I see kind of Tim Ferriss or Gary Vaynerchuk haters in comments on YouTube, it's always about them being a fraud. They're always like, oh, this person's selling snake oil. He doesn't really think that he's a fraud and then this, that, or the other. So I think sort of being disliked at scale like that, I'm completely okay with. But being disliked in sort of a one-to-one interpersonal interaction where I unintentionally cause someone harm, I would not be okay with that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I was surprised you took the hater turn because I thought you were going somewhere else with that. Which is that, I think I think I've had a few situations in the past where I think other people have disliked me for what I would consider to be a misunderstanding. Like if someone disliked me for
example, would you like to go into it?
It's not that interesting, and I have to like think about it.
Okay,
but,
fair enough.
I know there have been examples of this, and I always find that quite upsetting when I feel like the other person actually has it wrong, and like that I don't hold the positions they think I hold, or like I didn't mean something in a certain way. I think I always find that upsetting. But if for example someone disliked me for things that I would say are accurate, like positions that I do actually hold.
For example, that trauma doesn't exist.
I mean, I think that's a framing rather than a sort of objective fact. But if someone sort of disliked me for things that I'm like, if someone was like, I dislike you for X, Y, Z reasons, and I looked at X, Y, Z and they were actually things that were true about me and that I was sort of on board with, decisions I'd made or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, cool, that's fine. I would actually be okay with that, I think. But I think that the sort of dislike that comes from things like miscommunication, misunderstanding, that kind of stuff, I think those are a bit of a tragedy.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, like I wouldn't want someone to dislike me but be like, all Ollie cares about is being famous or something like that, because that's not my position. Yeah. And if they understood my position, they wouldn't think that way.
Yeah.
But if they take the position that Ollie cares a lot about kind of, being famous in some capacity, having a certain level of financial independence, and is willing to put himself out there in a way that's not standard for the medical procedure to do that. And therefore, I dislike that. I'm like, okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah. You can't argue with that.
Yeah. Fine. I really can't do anything about that.
So I think that brings us to the end of our summary of The Courage to be Disliked. This is a groundbreaking book. You should all definitely read it. If you haven't, we will have a link, an Amazon affiliate link in the podcast description. So if you do want to buy it, please buy it from there, and we'll get some money.
Fantastic. And also, if you're feeling very generous and you want to really support our channel, then please sign up at skillshare.com/notoverthinking. That really helps support the podcast. Plus, it's also actually like really good. I pay for Skillshare, even though they sponsor my videos and they sponsor this podcast, and it's a good amount of money that I spend every month. Like, I'm not sad to spend that money. I do get a lot of value out of Skillshare, and you can sign up to my own course as well. Anyway,
nice.
We normally end with like reading a review and like a interesting insight or insight of the week. Are you reading reviews?
Oh, this is a great review. This review is entitled Measure Over Magnitude from Rob Sue 1 from the United States of America. The review is, you guys are addressing topics with high measure, while many other podcasts tend to focus on magnitude. Things that impact the day-to-day much more frequently, but are not as sexy to talk about. Love the low-key, unscripted conversation format. What a great review.
Oh,
that's exactly what I want this podcast to be.
Fantastic. Rather than, it's such easy listening.
Yeah, don't want that.
I think it's fine if it's easy listening.
Thank you to Rob Sue 1 for leaving that review.
Right. Insight of the week. What's your insight of the week? I've got one while you think.
All right.
My insight of the week comes from some blog post that I probably read a few weeks ago, which was entitled, Do What You're Going to Do, or something like that. And it was the idea that when we're doing stuff, we should do the thing, and if, for example, when we're ironing our clothes, we should focus on ironing our clothes. When we're washing the dishes, we should focus on washing the dishes. And previously, like before coming across this, I would have thought washing the dishes and ironing clothes and stuff is menial time wasted, that I should be listening to a podcast at double speed instead, or listening to a song, or listening to my audiobook.
Being productive, yeah.
Or at least thinking about my business in some capacity or another. But earlier today, I sort of was reminded of this, and then I actively took out my AirPods from listening to a podcast while ironing the clothing that I'm currently wearing. And I just thought, I'm just gonna iron this, and I kind of gave it my full attention, and it was just quite nice.
Yeah.
And equally, whenever I do this with the dishes, like I actually quite enjoy washing the dishes when I focus on it. Whereas if I'm washing the dishes while listening to something, I feel like washing the dishes is an annoyance I'd have to put up with.
Yeah.
And listening to the thing is what I really want to do.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm trying to kind of do a bit more of.
Yeah.
Kind of do the thing that I'm doing.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I've had a similar feeling around washing hands, brushing teeth in the past. Brushing teeth is really good. When you get a new toothbrush, try and notice the new sensation of the way, like the shape of the new toothbrush kind of massages your gums. It's amazing. It's so cool.
Right. Is that your insight?
My insight comes from a tweet I did, a tweet that I done, a tweet what I done, I believe is the correct phrasing, which is that a couple of days ago I bought an egg tart for me and Lucas. I went out to buy our lunch, and I thought, okay, let's have a little dessert thing. I bought like 2 egg tarts, and so I had the lunch, and then I was thinking, ooh, a coffee and an egg tart, I wouldn't mind that right now. But then I thought, no, I've just eaten some food. I'm basically full. I just kind of would be having this extra food for the sake of it. If I wait 1 to 2 hours, the coffee and egg tart will taste much nicer. And so I actually did, and it tasted phenomenal. And it's just like I feel like, I mentioned this in the tweet, it's sort of like living in a permanent marshmallow test, where like you're sort of just thinking about like the delayed gratification reward in general.
Oh God.
I think about that a lot with regards to food now.
Mate, I have this dilemma every single day. It's like whenever I stop off at McDonald's on the way home for the drive-through, I think, right, do I want to eat this in the car where there's the risk of it kind of slobbering down my top? Or do I want to wait 11 minutes until I get home, or I can sit on my sofa and really enjoy this? And I always eat it in the car.
Nice. Smashed it.
Exactly. So I need to kind of sort my marshmallow test life out.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks a lot for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.